Yeah.
So, on this episode of Unreasonable Comics, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite and original favorite characters, Rogue from X-Men. This is from the individual Rogue comics, the 2004 to 2005 volumes. There was more than one instance where they tried to make a Rogue devoted character comic. I believe 2000 to 2001, and then 2004 to 2005, and then there was another instance somewhere mixed in there. But obviously they keep trying, just like other characters. They want to... She's introduced in the 80s, and it took them 20 years to give her a backstory. That just goes to show how great of a character she was, how great storylines they could do with her without having to give her a full onslaught backstory. We didn't even know her real name. She was always just Rogue until very soon after. I believe this was when we introduced her real name, if I'm not mistaken, or was the 2001 incarnation. Either way, she's a great character. She's definitely a dynamic female character because she's not... She's good and she's evil. She's always kind of played back and forth. If you read her in the original comics, she is raised by Mystique, and it's not her mother, but she has raised her like she was her own, and she eventually joins the Brotherhood with Mystique. That was a good kind of intro because they introduced her as a villain, and then later on she does become more of a hero type, but she never becomes an ultimate good. She's never just always the perfect person or anything like that, so that makes her a very dynamic kind of character for the sake that she is never, she's a Jean Grey where she's always prim and proper and happy and good unless she's possessed by some evil spirit. And it's like, no, she's good in her own sense and then bad in her other ways. She was kind of a mercenary type, not necessarily, but she was like an assassin. If you read certain comics, the way that she actually meets Wolverine a while before either one of them join X-Men, and they kind of go at it, and they actually have a rivalry for a long time. And even when they do both join X-Men, there's kind of a friction between the two of them. Neither one of them wants to work with the other one, and they're just both kind of at odds because, once again, Wolverine can be a good character, but we have seen him go off the deep end. We do know he has that potential to go kind of a little bit crazy. But with him, it's more of a, I've been living for so long, I don't even know who I am kind of thing anymore. And, certain comics in certain realities, he doesn't know who he is. He's lost most of his memory, and he's getting it back in pieces from different people. So it is a kind of good... I just like that they're at odds and they're rivals, and then eventually it softens. Definitely one of the biggest things is, depending on, it's usually in the cartoons, not in any of the movies that I've seen so far, and depending on the comics that you read, even like this one, I do not believe she has the ability to fly. She obtains the ability to fly because obviously we know Rogue's origins are that it's usually all the same around puberty when all the other mutants' powers develop, hers develop, and she can absorb powers through touch. For the most part, as long as the touch is short, she kind of zaps a little energy from them, but she doesn't necessarily harm them as long as she doesn't hold on for too long. With Miss Marvel, though, she held on, and Miss Marvel fought her because she had a very strong psyche, because she was part of the Kree, I believe. And they're very strong psychic kind of creations, that kind of mutant. But she absorbs her powers, and Miss Marvel is trying to fight her off. So in that battle, it was actually worse for Miss Marvel to fight her off because Rogue absorbed so much of her powers and almost left her to the brink of death that that ability to fly was now actually a permanent ability for Rogue. Rogue always obtained that ability to fly and kept it because the way she obtained it, it wasn't just a soft touch, it was almost like a battle of wills, and she went out and she got that power from, it was almost like a battle of who could keep that power. So that was definitely a great, it's like a great look into Rogue, because you do get to see, all the other characters have their powers, and whether they use their powers for good or evil is their own thing, but Rogue doesn't necessarily have, where Wolverine has his healing ability and his strength and things like that. It's kind of a similar thing where afterwards he had the bone claws, but then they gave him the adamantium, and that changed him a bit. Rogue is kind of the same way, where she had a little bit of a superhuman strength. She has her ability to basically zap people and knock them out if she needs to, but for the most part, she does not have her own individual good fighting thing. She has to steal other people's abilities to become a better asset. You know, she can steal Wolverine's healing ability, so that way she can heal from a wound. She can steal Jean Grey's ability and, you know, be able to fly things around and do all that kind of fun stuff. So she can in some ways be considered a weak character because her ability is not her own. Her abilities are not her own. Her only ability is to be a thief in a way. So you can see why she would be a villain, because in a world where everybody's being persecuted for being a mutant, she's got almost no ways to protect each other except to hurt people. You know, she has to hurt people to protect herself. And that is a very hard thing to deal with because, you know, she doesn't want to be bad, but it's almost like they force her to be, and that it's like backing her into a corner, and that's a really great idea and a mindset to be in. Eventually, she does. When she steals Miss Marvel's powers and almost kills her, she feels guilty for that, obviously, and then she joins the X-Men to kind of redeem herself, and this is where she interacts with Wolverine, and it's good. I like it better than other incarnations, and we'll see when we get into that transfer of media. But I like that she isn't this, you know, Professor X raised person that's so happy and go lucky and was treated kindly and everything. You know, she's a runaway. She's taken in by Mystique. She's, you know, showed a way to be a villain. She wasn't raised by, you know, Professor X or happy-go-lucky parents or anything like that. Obviously, she's had a hard life of it as it is, you know, and you see what she's developed into. And she's been raised, obviously, by somebody like Mystique, and then she goes and turns around and still goes to Professor X. You know, she still has that potential for good in her. So it really shows that quality, that character development of, you know, it's almost like nature versus nurture. You don't have to be evil just because somebody raised you to be that way. You have a power that can be used for bad, but instead she tries to use it for good now. You know, she tries to be a better person in that semblance. So that's definitely a great Rogue insight, is that she's always tried to be better. Now, if you read these comics, these are a little bit, it's a little bit different. She's obviously already got her relationship with Gambit. You know, Remy and her are a couple. That has been I believe, the longest running relationship for Rogue. There are instances of her dating Magneto and a couple other people, and that's just weird. But this is like everybody's go-to. You always know Rogue and Gambit, those are the couple together. I liked it again because Remy does have a similar, you know, personality to Rogue. It's kind of like a bad guy turned good, but still always that sly little devil underneath. You know, they are willing to be the little bad guy if they need to be. So that was definitely a good correlation between them. In this comic, we do get more of a background story on Rogue. It delves in this instance, Remy Gambit does not have his sight. He's lost his sight, so he's lost pretty much his entire ability. There is one scene, especially in this comic, where he goes off in search of her because, you know, he misses her. He loves her. That's his girl. And he tries to get into a fight with some guy he thinks that she's hooking up with. And she's like, you can't see, you can't fight. And he's like, I don't need to fight, while he's like, I'll just keep swinging until I make contact. So Remy is one of those people who's not just going to let the light, you know, he lost his ability. He's not going to let it put him down. He's still going to fight for her because that's who he cares about. I do like that they did this instance. There's the other story thread where Rogue loses her ability. All of her abilities, the flying, anything that she got from Miss Marvel, you know, the psychic ability, it's not psychic, but it's her psyche, which is where she took her basically, Miss Marvel's, not only her characteristics, but her actually personality and her thoughts and everything like that. So it's almost like a Jean Grey Dark Phoenix kind of thing, where there's this alternate personality inside, like a multiple personality type thing, where there's another person basically inside her head who takes over. So when she loses all of those powers, she's able to touch. She's able to be with Gambit, and that's, I think, because for the longest time we didn't have an interaction really. Their love story is so great because there's no physical contact. They have to find ways around it. She has to love him, and he's probably one of the greatest men in the world because he has learned to love a woman who he physically cannot touch. He can't kiss her. He can hold her, but there's nothing but clothing in between them. They can't be intimate. It's almost like having an asexual relationship where you're dating somebody but there's no actual sexual and physical contact. And I think that's probably one of the only comic book relationships to have that. It's sad that they did it, and the only reason they have that kind of relationship is because she can't be touched or touch people without hurting them. You would like for them to have an asexual couple. That's not because of somebody's ability getting in between them. But even still, it's nice that they have that representation of that kind of couple, that you can see that love can be just two people. It doesn't have to be a physical kind of thing. So that was really sweet, and it's nice to see that. Obviously Rogue is forced to live this life, but Gambit doesn't have to, and Gambit does he wants to live that life with her. And obviously if you read it in the beginning, when they first meet, he's constantly trying to sway her, and she's just not having any of it. She doesn't want it, because she knows she doesn't want to get too attached to people because she can't have any contact with them, so it hurts her. But Remy wears her down because he loves her, and it's the greatest thing ever. So definitely this incarnation of Rogue is good. I did like, again, that it's a solo character. It's her storyline. It's not anybody else's. It's not, sometimes when we get it's 80 characters intermingled with one comic book and you have to read 18 other, it's not like where you're going in with like a Justice League and you have to read Batman and Catwoman and Nightwing and all these ones, and just to get, the general idea of what's going on in the storyline. It is a pretty much all-encompassed closed sandbox where it is Rogue storyline, what's happening with her, and you don't really need an outside info. So when it comes down to it, I do prefer the 80s and 90s comics versus the later era, just because Rogue didn't get a backstory for 20 years, and that says a lot about a character. It says that people cared enough about her that they didn't need to know where she came from. She was a strong enough character on her own. This definitely does give a little bit of backstory, but it is very based on just Rogue in and of herself. So I would definitely say if you wanted to get into Rogue, this is a great place to start. This is considered volume 3 of Rogue. Rogue has had 3 individual volumes devoted to her. There's volume 1 and volume 2, and those are both only 4 comics worth, and they're considered mini-series. This was about 12 comics, I believe, for this volume 3 series. They are all also kind of oriented around whatever was popular at the time. The first volume is from 94, 95, and that was based on the 90s cartoon, so you get the brown jacket, yellow uniform kind of Rogue in that one. And then the volume 2 came out around 2001, and that one is catered around the X-Men Evolution. So she's got that shorter hair. It's more the dark red and the brownish color with the white streaks, and that green and black outfit versus obviously what we know further back from her. And then obviously volume 3, she's catered. Yes, she's got the yellow and green, but her hairstyle and even her face, she looks a lot like Anna Paquin from X-Men the movies, because this is obviously from 2004, 2005, so it is venturing into that time period.
If it's not silver or gold that we after, then ask yourself, is that how you wanted each day to be spent?
For the transfer into other media, I would have to start with the video games. Now, Rogue is not the biggest character because obviously she's part of the X-Men, so to get her, you basically have to get an X-Men game. She does make an appearance in the Deadpool video game for a few short, you get to play her for a little bit in there. But for the most part, you're going to do a Marvel versus Capcom, a Marvel versus Street Fighter, Ultimate X-Men, those kinds of video games where if you're going to get a Wolverine and a Storm, you're more than likely going to get a Rogue. As not necessarily if I wasn't a Rogue fan and just a video game fan, I would probably not want to play Rogue, depending on what abilities they're giving her. Because depending on what generation you get from her, she's very limited. Yes, she can steal powers from certain people, but the whole thing is, if you're doing say a Marvel versus Capcom and you're doing one-on-one, like even like a Street Fighter, it's just a one-on-one. So it's not like you're in a group of people where you can steal multiple powers and attack them with everything. You can only maybe steal whoever you're fighting against, and if you're using a rogue that already has a flying ability and the super strength, if the other person is flying in super strength, you're basically canceling each other out. It's not worth it to play it. Whereas if you do like a Wolverine or a Storm or somebody like that, you have a better options. So while I am very loyal to Rogue as a character, I feel like she is much better read than played. You know, the comics, they enthrall you because of her struggles and her dynamics and things like that, whereas her abilities, you know, her ability is the reasoning behind her struggles, but it is not all that she is. So that is definitely like the downside. The only thing I could see is if they did a rogue-dominated video game where, almost like Dante's Inferno or Infamous, you can choose the path of good or you can choose the path of bad. You can do good missions and help out the X-Men and save people and never kill, never hurt anybody, or you can maybe join the Brotherhood and, you know, you can do a kind of Miss Marvel thing where you're going to absorb powers from somebody and leave them near death or even kill them, and you follow that path of evil and you become like a supervillain. And that would definitely be a great game to kind of see, because you could, each mission's going to affect you obviously in different ways, and you get to see the struggles that she deals with. I want points for that if it happens. So for the transfer into movies, we first get to see her in the X-Men movie. That was the biggest what the fuck moment, I think, of all of our lives, when we had little mousy, shy Anna Paquin playing this strong Southern Belle dominant character. It was very frustrating. They cut out 90% of Rogue's backstory. We don't even get her backstory for 20 years, but we can tell that this girl's been through the ringer. And even if you didn't necessarily get backstory, there's still a story to Rogue, and they squashed it. The only things that they kept were the fact that, like most mutants, Rogue's ability developed as a teenager during puberty. She hurts somebody and she runs away. But Rogue also had a hard life growing up. I believe her mother's dead and her father was raising her, and it was just not a good time. And she goes and lives with her aunt, and that's who raises her. And then she still runs away. So, you know, it's all character building. It makes her who she is. The good thing about the comics is the fact that, you know, when Rogue runs away, she gets raised by Mystique and she joins the Brotherhood. And that's where she develops her bad side, and that's when she interacts with Wolverine. And, you know, they come to blows when they first meet their enemies. Whereas in the movie, she runs away, and within the first 5 seconds of running away, she meets Wolverine, and suddenly they're good together. And they're, you know, they join the X-Men, both with clean slates. And it seemed like neither one of them had a history. And that really bothered me, because you wiped away 90% of what makes them who they are. And I know that they could have, if they really wanted to, thrown in a Mystique. They could have had her run away and had that interaction with Mystique and been raised by her, even if it was just for a few months. And then, you know, obviously go off and she interacts with Wolverine. And then later on, when Magneto and Mystique come to capture her, it's almost like a sense of betrayal. It's kind of wrapping it all up into the same universe. It would have been great to tie it all together, but it seemed like they didn't want to have almost anything to do with the original storyline, and that really greatly bothered me. So I would have to say, for transfers, that was the worst of them. Definitely the movies was the worst representation of Rogue you will ever get. So with the TV shows, we got much better representation. We got X-Men, the 90s cartoon, we have X-Men Evolution, we have Wolverine and the X-Men, and there was even the stop-motion comic as well for X-Men. I believe there was another show as well, can't remember offhand, but for the most part, they've been pretty good. I have to say that the 90s X-Men and the Wolverine and the X-Men are two of the better representations. I know that the opening for Wolverine and the X-Men is kind of an homage to the original 90s cartoon, because you get the Sentinels, and it's a world where they're being persecuted. You know, mutants are known and they're fighting, and it was definitely like a nod. You didn't feel excluded by being a former 90s X-Men fan, you know. You could be growing up still, or you could be an adult and you could have kids and stuff, and you're just kind of watching with the younger audience, and you feel like, hey, they didn't forget about me. They still remember what we used to all enjoy. So I liked that we had that kind of, it was almost like a melding of the worlds. The other big difference was definitely Whereas the 90s had Jubilee, such a horrible character. The Wolverine versus the X-Men had Kitty Pryde, who was much better. And that was the bigger differences. The other thing is that when it came to Rogue's story, they didn't necessarily mention it, but I'd like to believe that the 90s X-Men was following the Rogue that we all knew from the comics, and she was a Rogue who had been with the Brotherhood and left it. Whereas with Wolverine and the X-Men, obviously this is later on, and Rogue goes and joins the Brotherhood after having been with the X-Men. So it was kind of like a swap of that. But to me, this is almost a, if you watch a Doctor Who kind of thing, there are fixed points in everybody's time. There are moments that everybody has to get through. It's, you know, a certain death of somebody, a certain meeting with someone. There are certain things that these people always have to do because it's what they're destined for. So I felt like Rogue was always destined to join the Brotherhood, either before or after, during, it doesn't matter. She feels some sort of connection with them. And I think part of that is because, you know, she understands that persecution, that outcast. You know, for the Brotherhood, they're heroes in their own mind. You know, they are mutants. They're being persecuted, hunted down. All these people want to kill them. That's why, you know, like they have the Sentinels and everything. And it's just like, they want to stop. They want to be able to live and be happy. And especially once Professor Xavier goes missing and everything like that, Rogue agrees with it because she's like, we're being taken down. They're seeing us as a threat, and we haven't done anything to them, so they're going to attack us first. And she just doesn't feel like that's a right thing to do. So she wants to stand up for herself. And obviously she feels like Wolverine and the X-Men aren't getting that done, that they're kind of letting themselves be walked all over. And she feels this connection with the Brotherhood, and she wants to join, and she does. Obviously, their methods become very kamikaze and very harmful, and they're hurting innocent people instead of the people that are trying to persecute them. And she sees that she's becoming a villain just like the people they've been trying to fight back against. And, you know, either way you look at it, Rogue has always figured that out, but no matter what, Rogue has also always felt some sort of alliance with the Brotherhood. So I definitely felt like that was a great character development, that it didn't matter nature versus nurture, how she was brought up, who she was brought up with, how it happened. You know, this is always a character development that she's going to have. It's not something that it's going to change, you know, depending on who she's around. So I liked that we had that kind of stable part of Rogue, that she's kind of like a rebel at heart in a way. So yeah, definitely that was a great kind of correlation between the two of them, where, you know, the 90s X-Men and the Wolverine and the X-Men, you weren't kind of getting two different worlds. You were kind of getting a similar, it was basically an alternate reality in a way. And I greatly enjoyed that. One of the biggest issues I know everyone had with X-Men Evolution was the age difference. They took a little bit of a liberty with that. If you read the original comics, if I'm not mistaken, Jean and Beast were supposed to be brought in around the same time, not necessarily the exact same age, but similar. So, of course, in X-Men Evolution, now you have Jean and Scott and Rogue and Kitty and Nightcrawler as teenagers, whereas Storm and Wolverine and Beast are more the adults. So, yeah, that was a change. I understand being upset about certain changes like that. So, you know, if I had been as adamant about it, I'm sure it would have tweaked me. But the one thing I did enjoy about the X-Men Evolution cartoon was that you did get the Rogue Nightcrawler Mystique storyline. So we do find out that Mystique is Nightcrawler's mother, and we do find out that Mystique is actually the one who raised Rogue for the latter part of her teenage years. And, you know, you do get that little kind of flashback to an homage, basically. You know, they weren't trying to make all their own new stories. They weren't trying to cut out every other past incarnation. They were just trying to figure out a way to work it in while catering to a younger audience. So I did like that. I did like that we didn't completely ignore them. I do have to say, though, that the 90s cartoon was the best representation because it best represented the 80s and the 90s comics. You get Rogue with the same powers, kind of the same relationship status, and almost the same person. You know, we don't really get We don't get to see Rogue in the Brotherhood. We don't get to see Rogue being a wild child or anything like that. Because with the X-Men cartoon from the 90s, you kind of just get thrown into it. There is no setup, really. There is no introductions. They don't go step by step with each character and telling you everything about them. You kind of just get thrown into their world, and it's either sink or swim. So that was definitely a great thing, because it's almost like the comics where you kind of just get thrown into certain stories depending on if you never picked up a first one, you just picked up a random one. So I did like that. I did like that Rogue had her flying abilities from Miss Marvel. I did like she had the super strength. She was that sassy, strong Southern belle. The one thing I liked was the dynamic between her and Wolverine. There was a bit of an animosity you could kind of tell between them. They bickered a lot. That could just be because they are such strong, dominant characters. Unlike in the movie where they make her that weak, mousy little thing, she is a very strong person. She's very vocal about her opinions. So, I mean, obviously, you could say that maybe it follows in the same reality as the Rogue being in the Brotherhood and coming to blows with Wolverine originally, and then them both joining X-Men, because you could say that maybe this is further down the line where they've become comrades and they've built that camaraderie basically, and they've had this relationship and they've made amends. So that could definitely be a later part. The one thing that did bother me about the X-Men 90s cartoon is the fact that for some reason Rogue has a minor crush on Scott. Jean Grey and Scott are obviously, the prom king and queen, they're the golden child, all that stuff, they're the ultimate good. And Wolverine lusted after Jean Grey, and Rogue had that little bitty crush on Scott. Thankfully, it was diminished very quickly when Gambit's character becomes more prominent, and obviously he starts to woo over Rogue, and I liked their relationship better. Just because also you have Rogue as a character who is already lusting after touch. Not necessarily a sexual touch, she's just lusting after connection. Spend a week without any human interaction and see how much it bothers you to not just, feel somebody touch your hand or to feel a hug or a kiss. It's one thing to choose not to do it, but it's another thing when that choice is taken from you. So it was frustrating to have Rogue being a character who's already lost so much, and now she's lusting after a person she can never have because he's in love with Jean. And it frustrated me. It was like, how much loss are you going to make this girl deal with? How much are you going to basically strip from her? So when you get you get Remy lusting after her, and I think the reason she did lust after Scott was because he was untouchable, because she knew there was no chance she could ever have contact with him. Whereas with Remy, she kind of pushed him away because she knew if she wanted to, she could fall for him, but she would still never be able to touch him. And that is a very hard thing to accept, is to say, look at what I can have, but look at what I can never touch. It's very hard. And like I mentioned with the comics, I do love that they are a great representation of an asexual relationship for the most part. Their whole relationship is built upon them. It is built upon their friendship and their love and just the way they interact with each other. It is not a sexual relationship. It is not dependent upon that. I mean, yes, obviously, it changes. It's not a perfect asexual representation, because obviously when Rogue she loses her ability for a short period of time, and there's even a point where Professor X manages to figure out that the reason Rogue has never been able to master her ability and to be able to turn it on and off basically is due to mental blocks. So once her mental blocks are down, she's able to actually control whether or not she takes powers and hurts people and takes their life force when she touches them. So it's almost like she's forced into an asexual relationship, not for want, but because of need. But it was still nice to have that. You could have had Rogue lusting after Scott for ages, but instead they decided to give her somebody who loves her and show you a relationship based on just interaction, not sexual. So that was definitely nice of them to show that you can, basically to show us that you can love somebody without having to kiss them, to touch necessarily their bare skin and everything like that. So I would definitely say that out of all of them, the 90s X-Men cartoon was the best representation, and it was definitely the best transfer of media for the Rogue comic books. So, Arrow Season 2 finale and recap. First of all, I flipped a shit, but we will get to that in 1 second. we start off the season after the bombing and everything, basically, of Malcolm Merlin blowing up
What we do
most of
isn't
Starling
the
City.
obvious. I'm loosening
So a
like
lot of prisoners
lozenges and
escaped.
proving I'm the opposite of what
They've
you
been trying to
think.
keep a lot of them in, but unfortunately, some of them keep slipping through. One of the first ones that slips through is the doll maker. The next one is the Count. The Count was a very hard episode, but it was really great at the same time. It For a long time, Oliver was trying to be good and not kill, and unfortunately, the Count put him in a place where he had to because he was going to hurt Felicity. And that ventures into my when I get to it section of the Felicity moments. But for the most part, those were the setups. These were villains who are showing up, and basically there's somebody funding them, helping them, getting them out, getting all these bad people to basically throw Oliver off his game. We find out that it's Sebastian Blood. Unfortunately, Oliver does not find this out for a time. He believes that he's on his side. I mean, it's basically the end of the season when he finally figures out, like, hey, Sebastian Blood's not a good guy. But that was the lead up. But even then, after a time, we figure out that even Sebastian Blood is not the mastermind behind this. It seemed like he was setting up all these people and getting an army together, but really he was doing it for somebody else. He was doing it for Slade Wilson, who has now become Deathstroke. And that was our ultimate villain for the season. We also get Black Canary. Sarah Lance comes back. I was not happy about that, only because they changed the actress. The original actress that they had season 1 for Sarah Lance looked a lot like Laurel, and I liked her a lot. And then they changed her, and I guess they thought we wouldn't notice or didn't care. Whatever. I hate when they do that kind of stuff, though. And I just did not enjoy her as much. I don't know what it was exactly, but there was just something about her I didn't like. Also, with Sarah Lance coming back, we get the League of Assassins. I liked this a lot. The only thing was they used Nyssa instead of Talia. They probably did this because Talia is more closely linked with Batman storylines and things like that. So you can't really get into Talia without getting into Bruce, and that's all part of, the Man of Steel movie and the Batman, Superman, all of that kind of storyline. So they're not really trying to separate the TV show from the movie's sandbox kind of thing. But definitely it was a great intro because it's going to give us more villains, more characters, more dynamics for us to venture into. I honestly kind of wish they would have done a League of Assassins spinoff or a Suicide Squad, because we also get a Suicide Squad episode. We introduced to that. And that was great. They do a little hint to Harley, but they didn't acknowledge really, they didn't call her Harley Quinn. They didn't show her face. You just hear that little quirky voice going, "Does anybody need a doctor?" And, that was a great nod to that, but unfortunately she is still wrapped up in the Batman franchise, and unfortunately that franchise is owned by a different company, and they really don't want to mesh them together, which just drives me crazy when stuff is split up like that, because you kind of, I wish they could do a Suicide Squad TV show, just because then they probably could get the rights to it and then be able to do it, and there's just such great dynamics between all of them. When Harley is not connected to Joker, you get really in depth with her, so that would have been great. We do meet Barry Allen, though, who is going to become the Flash. And that was a great thing, too, because it was a slight intro, and it gets, the Arrow fans hooked. It gets the people who are already invested in this kind of show hooked. Plus, he threw in a little dynamic between him and Felicity and Oliver. Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with a love triangle or any of that bull. But for the most part, it did kind of shake things up and gets Oliver thinking more about Felicity. The last part of because we've introduced a lot of characters this year, a lot of new developments in characters and their personalities. Roy Harper, who, if you read the comic books, he is Speedy. He is Red Arrow. But in this, they called Thea Speedy, which bothered me in season 1. And thankfully, this season, he did call him Speedy at one point, and Roy's like, "Don't ever call me Speedy again." But he does give him the mask, and he's got his own arrow in the final episode, and he is basically Red Arrow in that. And they're going to call him Venom next year for season 3, which I guess is fine. They're not really calling anybody by most of the names in the comic books. Even Count Vertigo was turned into the Count, things like that, just swapping things around. That's fine, whatever. But it was a good introduction to have him. Now, for the finale, well, The episode was called Unthinkable. In a previous episode, Sarah tells Oliver that he's going to have to do the unthinkable to beat Slade. Even Oliver admits he's going to have to do something unthinkable to defeat Slade because it is the only way to truly throw him off his game. Slade kidnaps Laurel, and Oliver takes Felicity to the mansion and tells her that he wants her to be safe. She, of course, every time something goes down, she wants to be there with him, she wants to fight with him. And he basically tells her, Slade kidnaps who he thinks is the woman I love. And he kidnapped the wrong woman. He tells her he loves her. I squealed like a little bitch. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw my freak out of the moment because they hinted that there was going to be an I love you said in the episode. They fucked with us so bad. Thea and Roy tell each other they love one another 5 seconds before we get to Oliver and Felicity. Then they tell each other they love one another. Or at least Oliver tells Felicity he loves her. We already know Felicity loves Oliver. She doesn't need to say it, really. And then they also have Diggle and Layla say it. So they kind of threw it at us from every angle just to cover all the bases, just to screw with us because they knew they could. But basically, I rewatched that same 10-second clip 3 times before I even finished the rest of the episode. I just flipped out. I am a Felicity fan. I am on that ship. Captain Amell is, the captain of our ship for that. But the great thing was, he did say that he loved her, and then he tells her, do you understand? Now, granted, in that scene, when they showed the flashback later, he's handing her the serum it's the cure for the Miracle to take out Slade. Everybody said the unthinkable was having Felicity save the day. No. Or that it was just a game, that it wasn't really true, or nothing was unthinkable. No. Afterwards, the writers, and even Stephen Amell and Felicity, all admitted that the unthinkable for Oliver was to put the woman he loves in jeopardy, to put her life as risk, to use her as bait, which he did. Oliver is the worst liar in the world. All of her season can't lie to save anything. He tells Felicity that, his coffee shop's in a bad neighborhood, that his friend is making a new sports drink, and that he ran out of sports bottles, so he put it in a syringe. He's a terrible liar. So he had to trick Slade and Felicity because she had to believe it enough for Slade to believe it. So the only way for Oliver to do so, to be believable enough, was to tell the truth. So he did. Stephen Amell even said, why would he lie to Felicity? He wouldn't. He doesn't. That is the whole dynamic between them, is that Oliver can't lie to Felicity. He's terrible at it. So he had to tell her the truth. He had to tell her he loved her. And the do you understand was not only do you understand that you need to take this and you need to defeat Slade, but do you understand what I'm saying to you? That was the real thing. And then at the end, there's them on the beach, and she's saying to him, that really was unthinkable. You pretending like you love me. We really sold it. Or you really sold it. And then he says, we both did. But the entire time she's talking to him, he doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, no, I didn't mean it, or yeah, I did mean it, or anything. He just stares at her. And it's almost like not denying it was confirming it. So it was definitely a squeal moment for all Felicity fans. It was a great episode. I definitely rank it a 5 stars. I loved that season, that episode. It was just great. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry if I spoiled anything for you, but watch it just because it's worth it to watch it. I rewatched it like 3 times in one night, so it's totally worth it. Can't wait for season 3. Hope they get more into this because it's great. So yeah, that was my season 2 recap and finale review for Arrow.
It's like magic from a hat, number 9, and it's tragic when they rap, and I wonder why.
So for collectibles, I chose the Bowen Designs Rogue Classic statue. This is a piece modeled after the 80s swimsuit Rogue. She is basically covered in almost head-to-toe full black latex, including her upper body, and she does have green boots, a green one-piece swimsuit, basically. That was the reason it was considered the 80s swimsuit, is because she does wear a swimsuit, it's just over a black latex. And even her gloves, and I loved this outfit on her. I wanted to cosplay, and I thought, one, it was the easiest thing to do, and I don't know, there was something about it that I love. It is one of the First of all, Rogue looks a lot better. A lot of times when you look at certain collectibles and statues and things like that, they give her a very awkward face, especially if they're trying to do the 80s with the big poof, you know, the 90s kind of X-Men cartoon hairdo, and her with the cliche brown jacket and the yellow, obviously, X-Men suit. While that is I think, probably the most popular Rogue costume, it is not necessarily my favorite. I know it, yes, obviously, if I'm going to pick a second best, that's going to be my second best because it's the one I've known for the longest. But the 80s swimsuit one I liked the best, and the statue looked best. One of the great things about the statue is that it looks a little weird if you're not looking at it actually up close, or like kind of on a table. If you're looking at on a picture, it's a little difficult to tell. But her foot has this piece attached to it, and it's this kind of clear, curved piece. What it's meant to represent is meant to represent her shooting off and flying away. And I thought that was a great thing to show because, like I said, one of my favorite powers that she has, obviously besides her being able to absorb abilities, is that she can fly. And I feel like a lot of times they just show you, you know, she's either posing like this or she's posing like this, and it's just really awkward, weird posing and things like that. And I look at the ones, and even the busts and things like that, they don't appeal to me. But that one is definitely my favorite. That one is extremely expensive also, but I feel like it best represents who she is. So that is definitely my top pick for the Rogue collectible section.